Hello all. Thank you, Natalia, for the invitation and for the presentation. This is my first time here, and when I was invited, they told me that the issue of discussion was going to be conflicts and resolutions. My formation is, education is economics. So, of course, there are other people that are much more suited to speak about conflicts and resolutions than me. This is my watch, so the presentation was supposed to begin now. So I tried basically to think a little bit of what to say. That's the truth. And I had two different ideas on how to approach the conversation. One approach was going to be much more technical, just trying to build a very coherent and rigorous analysis. And then they told me that you are going to be here for 10 days, that you are going to be among your peers. It's summer, so probably you are not sleeping too much. Probably at night you are partying, you are seeing friends, you are discussing. And so when I thought about doing mathematics and algebra, I thought that probably this was going to be the perfect recipe for all of you to fall asleep. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is not guarantee that you're not going to fall asleep anyway. But what I was going to do basically is just try to do something more conceptual, something that is more associated with arguments and ideas, instead of expressing those ideas into hard mathematics. So the first thing I did is, since I am not an expert on conflicts or resolutions, is go to Google. That is the know-all. And so if you go to Google, actually you can find this yourself. And what I try to do is first look for what conflict means. And what I found is that conflict is either a verb or a noun, and it has many different types of possible meanings. I don't know whether, you began in 16 or 17 of July, so probably you have been already attending a number of lectures. I don't know whether anyone already focused on what a conflict is, but just bear with me and let's use some of the minutes of the presentation to actually go over these definitions. So the first definition of conflict is clearly, is related to probably the thing that comes more readily to mind, an armed struggle. Two countries fighting each other. This is one, basically, when one thinks of conflict, this is probably the first thing that comes to mind. But then there are other acceptions, other definitions of conflict that are more subtle, if you want. And conflict is also something that it does not involve two countries, not even two people. Conflict can be a difference of opinion or a conflicting thoughts that a person, oneself, can have. I have a conflict of whether eating an apple or eating an orange. It's not a very relevant conflict, but it's something that involves myself and that it can solve only myself. It does not require to have two parties. Another one, of course, that is related to the first one is just the incompatibility of two different thoughts. So, this is as long as it goes to nouns. The verb already, of course, is very much related to the noun, and clearly, basically, having a conflict with someone, being in conflict with someone means that you have someone that has a different opinion, but this different opinion is completely and radically different from yours. So let's go a little bit more. So from this definition, let's try to identify what are the main elements of a conflict. So imagine you are trying to analyze what is a conflict that you have with yourself, or a conflict that you have with someone else, a conflict between two firms, a conflict between two countries, a conflict between two individuals. There are many different situations in which you can have this situation of conflict. So from this situation, general situation, let's try to identify what are the parts of this situation. So first of all is the number. And what we see from the definition is that a conflict does not necessarily imply that there are two people involved. There can be conflict with yourself, or could be two or more parties involved. Then who? I mean, what are the subjects of this conflict? I mean, what are the participants? Again, can be individuals, but not only individuals. You can have a conflict with your friend, but then there could be two firms that have a conflict over a patent. There could be two countries that have a conflict over a piece of land. Could be two football clubs that have a conflict over hiring the star of the time. What issues are involved in conflicts? Basically, any issue. Could be deep issues, philosophical issues. They could be completely idiotic issues. The point is that for a conflict to exist, you have to have two opinions. These two opinions you can have even yourself. You can be conflicted about what to decide about a specific thing. Should I study economics? Should I study law? What you do is you probably begin to think about how you approach the conflicts that you have yourself. First of all, you think a little bit about what are the decisions that I had to make, what are the parts of this conflict, and then usually when you decide for yourself, you have a framework in your mind that allows you to decide, okay, I'm going to study law or I study economics. But even if you don't do it consciously, you apply a framework to solve this conflict. And we're going to see a little bit more about that later. One thing that is clearly, I mean, and I think this is actually one of the most interesting issues in conflict, is that there is a time dimension. And this just changes everything. A conflict can be something that, I don't know, I went to a disco, there is a guy there, the guy is looking at me in a very threatening fashion, we fight. One-shot conflict, is that conflict, that's all. He goes home, I go home, no more conflict. So one-shot conflict. You apply a resolution to that conflict, and that's all, no more conflict. There are other situations that involve a decision in many points in time. So there are conflicts that are more complicated, that require that your solution be implemented in a number of periods, not only now, but a long time. And these conflicts actually are much more difficult to solve because they require coherent solutions to be implemented in a number of periods. Let's go back to this example of studying economics of law. So imagine I decide, after using my framework, in my mind, I basically look at the advantages of studying economics, the advantages of studying law, and after that I evaluate the benefits and costs of each of the alternatives, I decided that I'm going to study economics. This is my solution to this internal conflict. But this is a game that lasts for 5 years. When I decided that I'm going to study economics, I need to be coherent and consistently studying economics for 5 years in the future. Otherwise, I did not solve the problem. I did not solve my internal conflict. So these are the elements in conflict. Let's go back to Google and let's see the examples, just to illustrate a bit the definition. So, eternal conflict between the sexes. This is the first example. So, eternal gives you the time dimension between two parties. Bewildered by her own inner conflict, she could only stand there feeling vulnerable. Clearly, the person that was writing the Google dictionary was watching a lot of soap operas. But you see, the second is just your own inner conflict. So you can have a conflict with yourself. There was a conflict between his business and domestic life. Two parties again. Now, as a verb. Parents and children's interest sometimes conflict. Again, two parties. He remains a little conflict about Marlene. This is my favorite. About Marlene, who knows who Marlene is. But clearly the subject is, again, I can be in conflict with myself. let's look a little bit at the origin of conflict, from where conflict comes. And from where conflict comes actually tells you a lot. And I actually checked. My Russian is really disastrous, but I actually checked that conflict in Russian and in English is exactly the same. Conflict. It's just, you write it in Cyrillic, but it's exactly the same word. And basically, if you look at the components of this word, you have kon, that is together, and fliggere, that is to strike. So you have two things that are in tension, that they're striking against each other. So this generates a tension that basically is going to result in more conflict or in a resolution. And so, as a consequence of that, this is the etymology, you have that even in the word itself, you have the meaning of conflict. Just let's do a little bit more of Google. I promise I don't not work for Google, but I think this is interesting. This is the mentions of word conflict since the 1800s. So basically, Google has this enormous database. You can do this yourself. You can go to Google right now if you're bored and do it for the word that you want to find. And actually what they do is they look at the mention of word conflict through the years, and this is for the last 200 years. And what you see is that actually the subject of this summer campus is actually quite current. You have an ever-increasing use of the word conflict, meaning that right now people are aware of more conflicts, or maybe there are new conflicts that are rising every day. And it's interesting because you're going to see what happens with the word resolution a little bit later. Let's go to resolution now. Resolution is just a noun, it's not a verb. And basically is what you put in to solve a conflict. First of all, it requires a firm decision. So if you are going to resolve something, it's just the example of studying law or studying economics. When you decide on a course of action, you firmly go and implement this. The second is that resolution is not only something that one does, but sometimes it's the consequence of a group of people voting for a course of action. A law approved by the State Duma is a resolution. It's the form that the government decides on a course of action to solve a problem, a conflict. Of course, resolution is also the quality itself of being resolved to solve something. One thing that is essential, and I'm pretty sure that you are doing this right now, is that if you are doing a case study on conflict and resolution, and you think that your method to resolve an issue is the right one, there has to be evidence that your method actually solves the problem. And so an example from medicine. If you apply the right medicine, the symptom needs to disappear. The conflict needs to be resolved. And another acception, another definition of resolution that I think is quite interesting is that it's related with a small interval of a telescope or a TV, etc. So basically, a TV that has a very high resolution means that you can see the quality of the image much better. A microscope that has a high resolution means that you can go to the most intimate details of the issue that you are observing. And so if you are going to resolve a conflict, then you need to understand the problem that you are going to solve. This I can go very fast. The same subjects that you have in a conflict, you have in a resolution. You have the subjects can be one, two, or more than two. The who can be individuals, firms, countries, football clubs. Issues, any issue that results in a conflict will require a resolution, and the time dimension is exactly the same. I cannot solve a problem that is dynamic implementing a solution that is just for today. If you do that, you're surely going to have an additional problem tomorrow. If you think that you are going to be able to solve a problem that is a problem that you are going to have during a period of time, and you think that you're going to solve that problem by implementing a solution today and only today, you are not going to solve that problem for sure. So in your case studies, when you are analyzing the problem that you have, be sure that you identify correctly the time dimension of the problem that you are analyzing. More examples from Google. Number one, she kept her resolution. Basically, is a firm decision. The conference, a group of people, made the decision. Peaceful resolution of disputes. Disputes is a conflict, so resolution applied to dispute. The fourth is this example coming from the medical sciences. So remission is evidence that what you implemented actually solved the problem. A high resolution monitor. Basically, if you are going to solve the problem, be sure that you understand to the minute details the problem that you are analyzing. The origin of the word resolution is to loosen. This is very nice. In the case of Russian, it's not coming from Latin, it's coming from Old Slavic, but very interestingly, the word in Russian to solve is also, it means to untie. So to loosen, to untie. Conflict is tension, resolution is to loosen, to untie, it's to restore balance. Look at the usage of word resolution. If you remember, the usage of word conflict increasing a lot last 200 years. The usage of word resolution actually increased a little bit after the Second World War, of course, but then decreasing again. So when you look at books, clearly, when you look at articles over the last 200 years, what you see is much more use of the word conflict than the word resolution. Think about that. I think it's quite interesting. Now the point is this. Now we have a framework to analyze, conflict and resolution. We have a little bit better idea of what we mean by the two words. And it gives us, even if it's very basic, a framework of analysis. So my area of expertise is macroeconomics. I have my doctorate, my dissertation was on macro. I have minors in international and metrics, but this is what I can talk a little bit more at ease, if you want. So I'm trying to see, or at least what I try to see before coming here is what issue in macro that is very relevant to Russia I can present you in very simple words in 1 hour and a half. And also that would not put you to sleep. So let's use this framework and let's apply it to a macro conflict. And so what I'm going to use is a framework in which the element of analysis is one country, considered individually. So the subject that is going to have a conflict is one country. Who is going to be? And I say it's two or more because in the world, what we are going to see is that there are many countries that individually have this problem. So Russia will have this problem, Nigeria will have this problem, Trinidad and Tobago will have this problem, Venezuela will have this problem, Saudi Arabia will have this problem. All these countries in itself will have to find a solution for the conflict that they are facing individually. The issue is this. The issue is how to use the income generated from a non-renewable resource. The typical non-renewable resource in which Russia is extremely wealthy is oil. And we are going to see how the use of oil creates all sorts of conflicts. Some of them you may be aware about if you read the newspapers. Some of them maybe not so much. What I'm telling you is that this issue, regardless of whether you want to think about it or not, is extremely relevant for you, for the future of your professional life, for the future of the professional life of your sons and daughters, and for the future of professional life of your grandsons and granddaughters. So it's, in terms of the time, it's an issue that it involves a solution that is going to require the implementation of a solution during a lot of periods of time in the future. But let's do a little bit more. Let's put the magnifying glass. Let's use a high-resolution microscope to see exactly what we mean by countries and see the type of conflicts that the use of a non-renewable resources generate. What do we know for sure about oil? When I say, and this is a question for you. When I say that oil is non-renewable, what I'm saying? Oil is going to be there forever or not? I want to hear a louder answer. No, good. So if oil is not going to be there forever, it means that there is Russia right now, Nigeria, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Trinidad and Tobago. They have an asset. But this asset is there in the ground, and that's it. The value of that asset is going to depend on the price of oil, but this asset is fixed. It cannot be replicated. And so there is, and you're going to see why, there is going to be a conflict, and if you heard the words import substitution in the press during the last 2 years, you are going to realize very fast of what I'm talking about. The pace at which you spend this asset that is in the ground is going to generate a lot of different incentives for the export sector and for the non-export sector. And give me a second before going into detail with this, because otherwise there's a high likelihood that I'm going to confuse you. Just for now, take into consideration that there's going to be a conflict between export and non-export sector associated with the use of this resource. This one, the second one, is much easier to understand. I don't need to explain too much. There is a conflict between you, this generation, and your sons and daughters, the future generation. Why? If I extract the oil that I have, and I spend it all now, how much money is going to be available for the future generations in terms of the capacity to spend? If you spend everything right now in your lifetime, how much money is going to remain for future generations? How much? I spent, during your lifetimes, you extract all the oil. I'm telling you, you are 20 years old. Russia is going to run out of oil in the next 50 years. That's for sure. So it's your lifetime. You are going to see this. So imagine during your lifetime, you spent all the money that is generated by the extraction of oil. What is going to happen to your sons and daughters? Do you think that they're going to have you spent all? Are they going to have any money to spend of this asset? Yes or no? Good, no. And then the third thing that is very, very important for Russia, this one I'm going to touch a little bit less because it's actually quite complicated and it's more technical, but I'm putting it there for you to realize. We are in Kazan, Republic of Tatarstan. Tatarstan is rich in oil. You go outside, you have this beautiful facility, you see the roads, you see the stadiums, you see the city, everything is shining. Beautiful roads, great infrastructure. You go to the Republic of Chuvashia, which is barely what? 170 kilometers from here. Not rich in resources. So there is clearly an issue of how you use geographically, if you're thinking about Russia as a whole, how you use the resources, so the resources that are in specific parts of the country are evenly distributed. So these are basically three types of conflict that result from the utilization of this asset, the non-renewable asset that is oil. Let me go a little bit on macro now, because some of the arguments that I'm going to do require that you remember a bit of your macro. Just please raise your hands how many of you already finished college, so basically the university. Before that, you are not master students. How many of you are in college still? No, it cannot be only one. How many of you are in college right now? Good, so most of you. How many of you have had macroeconomics in college? Raise your hand. No, cannot be. Only, how many of you are doing management or anything related with business? So then, I mean, how many of you are studying medicine? How many of you are studying medicine? No one, right? You're studying medicine? No way. Really? One. Physics. And engineering, for instance. Okay, 3, 4. All right. So basically, I think that the audience is just basically business, economics, and I mean, one medicine, some engineerings, but most of you have been clearly exposed to macro, to markets, to supply, demand, and prices. So let's use a little bit of that. The first thing I'm going to define is this, and I ask you to bear with me. This is the only algebra that I'm going to use in the whole presentation. But I need you to actually understand, because if you understand this, you are going to be able to understand all the arguments that are in the newspapers for the last 2 years, okay? So just bear with me, just a very stupid concept. So the concept is the concept of relative price. So let me define two goods, apples and oranges. You know what an apple is, you know what an orange is. You don't require medicine or engineering or mathematics. So apple and oranges. Let's suppose that an apple costs 10 rubles. Let's suppose that an orange costs 5 rubles. Now I'm going to define a relative price between apples and oranges. So the relative price is equal to the price of an apple divided the price of an orange. So 10 divided by 5, 2. Now, I'm going to use this concept for what? First of all, a relative price, meaning that I need how many oranges to buy one apple? 2. Perfect. This concept that I can use for apples and oranges, I can use for slightly more sophisticated goods. So instead of just doing the very stupid example of focusing on apples and oranges, let's just go and try to define two categories of goods that include actually a set of goods. So I have there price of exportable goods divided by price of non-exportable goods. It's exactly the same concept that I just did. It's a relative price. The only difference between the two is this. An exportable good I can produce, and someone in Argentina, in Mexico, in Venezuela, in Spain can actually consume. I produce an automobile, and I can consume it domestically, or I can export it. Imagine now the restaurant, your favorite restaurant, either in Kazan, in Moscow, or whoever. You go to that restaurant to eat your favorite meal, and you cannot export that restaurant. The person that is serving you food, you cannot just take the restaurant and move it out. So there's a clear difference between goods that you produce and you can export or you can import, and goods that you produce domestically and you cannot move. And the difference is this. The price of the goods that cannot be moved are determined domestically. The price of the goods that you can export or import are determined abroad. So you take those prices as given, and the prices of the ones that you cannot export or import, you determine inside the country. So what happens, now let's do the second concept that I'm going to use for coming from basic economics and nothing else. What happens when the amount of automobiles that Russia demands are higher than the amounts of automobiles that Russia produces? You import the difference, right? Basically, if you are producing X amounts of whatever automobile, but the demand is higher, you just import the rest at international prices. But if you have an increase in demand, like the demand, you have an increase in purchasing power, and you demand more meals in your favorite restaurant, what is going to happen with the price of the meals in that restaurant? It's going to increase. So the question is this: why I'm saying this little bit of macro? Well, I'm saying this a little bit of macro because of this. Let's go to analyze exactly the conflict right now. The conflict that we have is, imagine a country discovers oil. This actually happened to Equatorial Guinea in 1989, 1990. It was the poorest country. Now it produces only oil, nothing else. Venezuela produces only oil. I mean, they have one of the richest plains in the world, the Llanura of Orinoco. They don't produce food, they only produce oil. So what's going on? What happens? So let's suppose that we are going to analyze the problem of a country that discovered oil. And so we are going to use these examples. We are going to use as exportable good wheat. So we have oil. We just discovered the country has oil. But the country can produce wheat because it has land. And the non-exportable good that I'm going to use as an example is restaurants. So my relative price, the one that I'm going to be interested in analyzing, is the relative price of wheat vis-a-vis a meal in your favorite restaurant. The country discovers oil. So suddenly, from right now, I have zero income from oil. Tomorrow, I take all this oil and I have a lot of more money to do. So the government sees itself with a lot of money that did not have before. What is that the government can do? They can do 4 things. So we are beginning to see how to resolve this. So 4 things. The first thing is they can spend everything. So basically they take all the money from the oil and they spend it all. The second thing that they can do is save part of the money and use part of the money. The third thing that they can do is, I get all the money, I put it in a bank outside, and I also spend the interest, but I keep my asset. So basically, before I have my asset below ground, now I extract it, I sell it, I have a pile of money, I deposit that pile of money in a bank, I don't spend anything of that pile of money, I only spend the interest. The 4 alternative is I take all that money, I put it in the bank, I left it there to gain interest, and I don't spend anything. 4 different solutions for the same problem. Let's analyze the first solution. I discover oil, I get a pile load of money, and I spend it all. What happens with the country? The first thing is that, of course, the price of wheat is determined internationally. It's going to stay as it is. But the government is going to be transferring to all of you a lot of money. All of you are going to be spending all that money. All of you are going to, for sure, going to your favorite restaurant. So the price of the non-exportable goods is going to increase a lot. One thing that is important to remember is that there is one good that is actually not a good, it's just human capital, it's yourself. If there is an increase in the amount of money that is spent in the economy, the non-traded good that is the most important is labor, is workers. So wages are going to be increasing a lot, much more than wages in other countries. So you are going to have that the relative price of a tradable good, wheat, is going to decrease with respect to the relative price of non-tradables. This is the first symptom that you are going to have. The second symptom is you are spending a lot, so imports of wheat are going to increase. The third symptom is that since the price of the meals in restaurants is increasing, there's going to be a very large increase in the supply of restaurants. The fourth is that all of you that live now, right now and are spending this are enjoying, because you are spending this asset that was in the ground, but future generations clearly are not going to enjoy anything because you are spending it all. Then, this is actually quite important. At some point, wealth of oil runs out. There is nothing more to spend. And so you are going to find a country that is full of restaurants but produces no food. And the last point, and this is related to what I told you before, that this is completely related to your life and the life of the people that are going to come after you. When there is an increase in the price of a meal in a restaurant, it means that benefits in restaurants are high, that it actually pays really well to be a chef, because if I'm employed in a restaurant, I'm going to be earning a lot of money, so basically I'm going to be studying to be a chef, because prices of having a good meal in Moscow are 2-3 times higher than in Monaco. But there are not going to be farmers or engineers. So the situation when oil runs out is a situation in which the country is extremely vulnerable. There are other options, of course. This is an extreme option. Let's go to another option, the other extreme. 4, save all the money and spend nothing. What's going to happen to the economy? If something is going to happen, I have a lot of money in the bank. Interest is accruing, but I'm not spending. Something happens with the economy? Should not, I mean, if I'm not spending anything, nothing should happen. So the money is there, no one uses it, nothing happens. As a resolution for a problem does not make a lot of sense. Of course, but I'm putting the money outside Russia. Exactly. But I'm supporting Russia? No. So if my conflict is to decide how Russia is going to use this wealth that is in the ground, and my solution is give this money to someone else to use it, it's not, at least it's not the solution that I would implement. Maybe you are, I don't know, you really want other countries to develop and you give them the money, but I would not. Then there are 2 intermediate options. The second option is you save part of the money, you spend part of the money. The third option is your asset that is in the ground, you put it completely in the bank, and the capital you don't use. You only use the interest. So you spend something, but only the interest of that money. Both of them, 2 and 3, you are going to have a little bit of what's happening in one. You are going to have an increase in the supply of restaurants for sure, but not as big, because you are not spending all the money. So you are not going to kill the incentives for farmers. You are not going to kill the incentives to be an engineer. Not everyone is going to be wanting to be a chef. And when oil runs out, there's going to be, instead of an economy that does not produce food and only has restaurants, you're going to have an economy that is more diversified. Now, let's go to reality. I am not making this up. Numbers that I'm going to use are from your country. First chart, this chart. What is this? What? Oil prices, very good. So let's look at the evolution of oil prices. Oil prices were like $20 in 2002. They were like $140, 140. So it's multiple of 7 by 2008. So what this means, Russia has oil. The value of this asset when oil prices were going up, what happened with the value of these assets? Increased like crazy, increased a lot. Russia suddenly was much wealthiest than it thought it was going to be. There is a global financial crisis in 2009, prices plummet, but then rebound. And they stay around 100 for a long time. And then what happens? Sorry? But ruble went down for a different issue, and we're going to see. This is getting already a little bit sophisticated. Bear with me, and let's do the idiotic part first. What it went down was the price of oil, and it went down because of what? First of all, supply and demand work. Oil prices were high, and so someone realized that you can extract oil from different places, and so the supply increased. The second thing is China is growing less. So demand from China is growing less, supply of oil is increasing more, prices plummeted. And so if you are standing there, imagine it's you. Any of you actually are in charge of managing the oil weight of Russia. I'm standing here. Or I'm standing here. You look at the past, it says, looks pretty good. Oil prices are going to be 100 forever. I'm very rich. I can spend forever. But then, you're standing here, and you say, look, things do not look so well. But I spent like crazy before. So let's do a different chart now. This is second chart. And what I ask you to focus now is on the shape of the green line. So I'm going to do like this a little bit. Tick, 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 tick. See, green line and this blue line. Green line, blue line. They are similar, right? Why they are similar? They are similar because the green line is the government revenues. So government revenues increased a lot when oil prices were going up. Now let's focus on this. I lost my presentation. Just a second, no? I think I lost my presentation. Yes. It's sabotage. Yes. Good. So let's go fast to where we were. There. So the blue line now. Blue line is government spending. Look at what happened to government spending as oil prices were going up. It was increasing or it was constant? It was increasing a lot. It was increasing as much or not? So if this blue line is below the green line, right? So if the blue line is increasing but still is below the green line, it means that the government was spending a lot, but not everything that was coming in, correct? So basically, if we want to see the resolution for this problem, the government was using this strategy. They are using basically part of it, they are saving. And actually, you can see this very well. Look at what happened in this period. In this period, again, look at what happened in 2008, 2009. Oil prices plummet, revenues plummet, but look at expenditures. They're still up. So expenditures higher than revenues means that the government is using what was saving. But the problem is, it seems that clearly it was using this, but look at what happened now. Oil prices decrease, government decrease in their revenues, but also spending decrease. And it decreases because the government is aware that these lower oil prices probably are going to be there for a long time, and they realized that they were not as rich as they thought they were. Now let's go to the prices of apples, to the prices of oranges concept That is the only algebra that I did in the presentation. Or the prices of wheat divided by the prices of restaurants, or the prices of exportable goods divided by the price of non-exportable goods. This is from real life. This is Russia, okay? So look at this. And let me see if I can do this now. Here. Yes, here it is. So look at this. The relative price of restaurants is increasing here. You see? And the relative price of restaurants here increased like 40%. And look when it increased by 40%. When government spending was increasing, when all prices were increasing and we thought that we were going to be rich forever. Look what happens now. What happens now is the prices of wheat actually are increasing a bit because the prices of restaurants are decreasing again. And the reason why this is happening is because we realize that all prices are not going to be 100 forever, all prices are going to be lower. What happened in the last few years actually was just a part of this very long cycle, and so we are spending less and we are saving more. So what are the resolutions then? The resolutions is to implement a rule to see how we are going to spend this money, because the way we spend this money has consequences. The way we spend this money has consequences for you because it's going to pay more to be in a restaurant than be in engineering. So this has consequences. And so it's important that the Congress or the institution that is solving this problem takes into consideration all the factors. So let's finish and just look a little bit at how different countries solve this problem. I was mentioning Venezuela a little bit ago. Venezuela, after Saudi Arabia, is the country that actually has the largest asset in the ground. It's the country that has the largest oil reserve, conventional oil reserves in the world. It's probably, I mean, if you look at it like this, it's probably one of the richest countries in the world potentially. But if you look at what Venezuela produces, it produces just oil. Venezuela can produce or could produce all the supply of goods that its population consumes. But right now, it imports more than 95% of the food that they consume. And the reason why this is the case is because they implement resolution of problem number one. They take the oil and they spend it all. So it does not pay to produce wheat. It pays to have a lot of restaurants. The second is what Russia is doing. But not only Russia. Saudi Arabia is doing the same. Trinidad and Tobago is doing the same. Nigeria is doing the same. But the thing is that this is a big pool, and there are lots of proportions. I mean, some countries save 10%, some countries save 50%, some countries save 30%. And if it's a lot of money, and you are only saving 10%, you can have consequences. You can have more or less the same consequence that Venezuela. So you have a very long range. What is the third solution? The third solution is, I know that that asset that I have in the ground is an asset that is non-renewable, that belongs to me, that belongs to my daughters, that belongs to my granddaughters, that belong for the country forever. So I'm not going to spend it. I'm not going to spend that resource because that resource belongs to this generation and to all future generations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to extract it, and I'm going only to use the interest, but I'm going to keep the capital so future generations can use it, so the incentives for the country continue to be to produce food, not just import it, for people to actually continue to be farmers and study engineering instead of just being chefs. And this actually, someone is doing it. Norway had all the problems that Russia, Saudi Arabia have in the 1980s and 1990s. They realized this. When they realized this, they implemented a rule They approve it by law, and they implement it. And they have right now more than $1 trillion in assets. Now they have a problem. Interest in those assets is so big that they have to actually consider to reduce the amount that they spend because they are too rich. And now, fourth, save all the money and spend nothing. What country do you think? Yes, please. Sorry? 4? No. Why? Well, just tell me your line of reasoning. I want to understand. No. Yeah, but this is good answer. But they are not saving the money. They are extracting, and instead of buying to Saudi Arabia, they are buying the shale produced at home. They spend it. No. They had, not anymore. Yeah. Germany doesn't have oil. Canada has a lot of oil, and they are spending it very wisely. No, Abu Dhabi has, first don't have oil, I think, but it has, Qatar, I think they have enormous piles of money in the bank. But they're spending a lot. Who? Who said no one? Who says no one? Just raise your hands. 1 there, 2, 3, someone else, 4, 5, 6. But of course, no one is doing this. Completely idiotic to actually have all this resource and not use it. Of course you have to use it, but you have to use it wisely. So basically, let's summarize. I saw that some people actually fell asleep, but at least it was like around, I was counting a bit, people that fell asleep, it's around 5%. So I would consider this to be a success. So what we did, so we look at definitions of conflict and resolution, and we actually went pretty much in detail on that. Second, we identify what are the players in conflicts and resolutions. So when you are doing your own work in terms of analyzing a conflict and a resolution, be sure you know who the players are, what issue you want to solve, what is the time dimension, whether it's a one-shot game or it's a multi-period game. Be sure, because it depends on this, what type of solution is going to be the most important. We apply this framework to analyze the use of non-renewable resources, oil. We realized that different course of action, different resolutions result in a very different dynamics and results for the economy. And fifth is that in order to have a good resolution, what we need is laws and government policies that are very detailed and require extensive analysis to identify all of these problems and apply the right solution. And there is international experience that can help you identify the right approaches. With that, I stop. I appreciate very much. I realized that you're probably doing and seeing a lot of different issues and subjects, and I hope it was more or less helpful, interesting. I don't know, we have like 12 minutes. It's up to you whether you want to ask questions, you want to leave. Some of you want to ask questions, some of you want to leave. I'm completely open, so if there's any questions, I'm available. If you want to leave and have coffee or breakfast or whatever, you can go. But we have 12 minutes, so we will stay and discuss about this, or something else, about life, or we stop. Any questions? No questions? Yes, question. Your name? Yes. Do you have
one, two, this.
I'm Regina, and I want to ask a question. At first,
a quick question. So you are econ major, management?
Economics.
Economics, good.
Yes. At first, thank you a lot for your lecture. This was pretty interesting.
Thank you.
And I want to ask about oil prices. What do you think, will they increase or decrease in the future?
Oh, if I knew that I would not be here, I would be trading, I would be really millionaire. I would be like so millionaire. I mean, maybe I would come here in my Ferrari and explain you why I was right about oil prices. Truth is, no one knows. Truth is that if you look at what the market expects, usually, and actually I did a bit of research on this. If you look at future prices, so in the market basically, or in these theories of economists that in principle sustain that markets are very efficient and use all the information at hand to establish future prices, these future prices should reflect, again, all the information. And what you see is that at this point, future prices say that oil prices are going to remain low for a long time. Basically, if you look 5 years down the road, oil prices are going to be around $55, $56 per barrel. This is futures. But if you look, and this is actually quite funny, I'm going to give you like 2 anecdotes. There is a professor in Chicago that is an eminence on commodities, in particular oil. He is considered as the most respected expert in oil. So there was a conference on oil and on the future of the oil industry in July 2014. Let me show you this. Let me show you this because it's actually quite funny, I think, in my nerdy mind. So here. So he was standing here. So the professor is standing there. At that point in time, you see it, right? There. So the professor is standing there in this conference in Chicago with all the experts that they know all about the industry. And this professor says, if you're interested, I can send you the link. He says, oil prices are going to be high for a long time in the future. So July 2014, he actually mentioned like 120, 130. He made that statement in July 2014. So 6 months later, oil price was 50% less. And 2 years later, it continues to be 50% less. So the point is, it's extremely difficult to do a forecast for oil prices. Completely difficult. What I can do in order for my answer to be not completely useless is to give you like some hints that you can look at to have a better idea of where they might go. So there are 2 things. First thing is supply. If you want to know prices, you need to look at supply and demand. This is always sure thing. On supply, what I would say is this. Again, look at this. See, oil prices were very high in this period of time. See, they were very high here, very high here. This decrease was only temporary. So a lot of people, a lot of very brilliant people were thinking, how can we extract more oil? Because it's very profitable to extract oil. So the US had conventional reserves, very little actually, very small. But it had, Canada too, they have these enormous small fields that with specific technology, they can extract oil at very large costs. Saudi Arabia can extract cost at $5 per barrel. Basically, you walk in the street and you find oil. This is extremely cheap. Russia produces oil actually quite cheaply too. But producing oil with this technology is extremely expensive. But since oil prices were so high, it actually paid off to develop this technology and extract it. And if you look at the supply of oil from 2010 to 2014, and you see how much it increased, the whole increase in the global, in the whole world supply of oil was coming from the US because they developed this technology to extract oil in very difficult circumstances. So supply of oil increased a lot. It was increasing very little here, but then oil prices were so high that resulted in this increase in the supply at these prices. At the same time, we have the demand. And China, you know, now is the second largest economy in the world. They were increasing a lot. But of course, when economies develop, wages increase, competitiveness begin to decrease. They were growing at 8, 9% for a long time. This cannot last forever. So the growth of demand of oil from China cannot be growing at 8, 9% per year every year. It's beginning to decrease. So what we have here is the combination of the fact that the supply increased a lot because prices were high, and China began to grow less. So the adjustment was immediate. And the adjustment was immediate because what happens? Stocks of oil began to increase enormously. And so with stocks of oil began to increase enormously, people were not able to sell it. Prices plummet. The thing is this, now prices plummet. We are at 50. It's not so profitable for the US to produce oil anymore. Because remember, the technology that you need to extract oil from in between the rocks, you have to introduce water, you have to do a lot of things, it's very expensive. Technology is improving, but still, it's not that you find, and like in Saudi Arabia, that you walk in the street and you find oil. It's very, very difficult. So the thing is this, at oil prices 50, you see already that the supply of oil is decreasing in the US. The point is, if the price increases again, it's going to be profitable again, they're going to extract oil again from shale. Not only from the US, in Argentina or in Mexico, they have huge shale reserves. So, again, this is not a forecast because I'm sure I'm going to be wrong. But if I have to see, like my intuition is that oil prices are going to fluctuate between 50 and 70 for a long time. Because if they go above 70, there's going to be a supply reaction very fast. If they go below 50, I mean, it's just demand is going to support it because demand is going to continue growing. So I would say it's going to be around there. And if you look, and this is interesting, if you look at the newspaper, just I invite you, just take Vedomosti or take whatever newspaper that you want, and look at what is the forecast that is being discussed for the federal budget here for the next 3 years. The government is thinking and is putting in the budget that oil is going to be at 40. So they realize that these factors are at play. And so they had to plan the expenses for $40, not for 70. If you look at the budget in 2014, they had oil prices in 5 years at 100. So I would say that if I had to give you more or less an answer, these are the elements I would say, from 50 to 70. I mean, it can go to 30 sometimes, can go to 90 if there is a conflict in the Middle East or anything, because there are a lot of factors, but structurally, fundamentally, in that corridor. Any other questions? Yes.
Good day, my name is Artyom, and we...
Economics, engineering, what?
Analytics.
What analytics? I mean,
Economic analytics.
Economics, good.
Yeah. At our lectures, we had a lot of debates on the question, is it right to spend a part of money and to save a part of money? Sorry. Isn't it better to spend money for improving industries, for improving agriculture, as at starting of the crisis we had in National Welfare Fund in Russia about 2 trillion of rubles. But now this fund is empty, but nothing changed. Is it right?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but let me rephrase, okay? And you tell me if I am...
What do you think it would be better if we spend money, all the money, to improve our factories, agriculture?
Very good, very good. So what I would say is that question you can answer with this. So, possible courses of action, okay? Therefore, so we saw that spend all the income that we earn is not a good idea. Even if you do infrastructure, Because when you do infrastructure and all these things, the point is that you are putting too much money in the economy. If your economy, say, is 100, and you are putting 20, 30, 40 each period, there is no doubt that even though you are investing in infrastructure and improving technology, wages are going to increase too much, you are going to be not competitive, and then you are going to have incentives to be chef and not to be an engineering, no matter how much you spend in infrastructure. We know already that 4 is a stupid option. I just put it there just to say that it's a stupid option. And then you have 2 and 3. And between 2 and 3, 2 is very broad. I mean, spending part and saving part. What part? I spend 10% and save 90. I spend 20 and save 80. That is a matter of judgment. So what I would say, and this is a very difficult issue, it's not an easy issue, but I mean, at least we can put it in general terms. What I would say is that you need to spend enough so your economy does not lose competitiveness. So you spend, if you want, in improving infrastructure, improving education, improving technology, but not too much that some of the money ends up in just changing the relative price in favor of non-exportables vis-a-vis exportables. And if it does change, that the investment that you are doing in technology, in improving human capital, in improving infrastructure, compensates the increase in non-tradable goods. So Norway is very competitive. Norway is very competitive, but is preventing this disease that's generated from the spending of oil in investing exactly in the type of things that you are saying, technology, infrastructure, etc. Again, it's important that it is not any infrastructure. There are lots of examples in countries around the world, and I'm not going to make names, that suddenly they put a highway in the middle of a jungle, in the middle of a desert, and no one's used it. It's just complete zero efficiency, so just wasting money. So you need to assess what's more important and be prudent in how much you spend. So there is really no rule of thumb. If I had to decide, if it was for me, and I would choose 3, because 3 basically allows you to spend, but make sure that what you're extracting is there for the future generations to continue to use it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
Hello, my name is Kenneth, and I'm from Nigeria.
Nigeria.
And
Kanu.
I study information technology, actually, computer science. So I'm not in the field of economics, but from the little I learned from high school, I want to ask some questions. So in some countries where you have basically, where the country's economy is basically dependent on oil, for example, let's say you are in a position to make the budget for the country. So, and you are having a situation where the oil prices are fluctuating.
Right.
So with which price should you use to make the budget? And bear it in mind that if you use the lowest price to make the budget, that causes corruption in some countries, because most politicians, they use the lowest price. Then when the margin goes up, whatever they get with it, they embezzle it. So most economics don't allow that. And again, if you also use the lowest price to make it, then you have enough money in the country. It would lower the productivity because there'll be less spending even when you have the money, and the productivity will be lowered. So how do you solve such problems?
It's a very good question. So thanks for the question. I would say that the problem that you are pointing out is the problem that countries that use strategy 1 or strategy 2 have. Because if I use strategy 3, I don't have that problem. If I use strategy 3, the only thing I have to do is I don't care about the oil price, or I care a little bit, but less. And what I care about is how much money I have in the bank. So I go to the bank, I see I have $100. And I know that for that I can get 4%. So what I'm going to spend is 4. And I'm going to keep the 100, no matter what the price of oil is. So to answer your question, if I want to live in an ideal world, or the world in which Norwegians live, is that the best oil price to use in the budget is no oil price. It's just basically de-link oil prices from expenditure. When you link oil prices to expenditure, you create cycles in expenditures, you create cycles in which you have a lot of restaurants and then you need to close all the restaurants and then all the restaurants are again there and you create the wrong incentives for people because in the end what happens is that the prices and the incentives in the economy are linked to a variable that you don't control. You don't control oil prices. Nigeria does not control oil prices. Russia does not control oil prices. You cannot set up policies on a variable that you don't control. Set up policies on a variable that you control. That's also another, actually, a good advice if you have to solve a problem. Just focus on the things you can control. Oil prices you can't.
So, sorry again, but like I said, this economy totally depends on oil. So,
you are not going to convince me. The economy does not depend only on oil. The economy, what you are telling me is that the budget depends a lot on oil. So let me give you a little bit like a different type of answer. Of course, what I'm telling you is a caricature. It's just basically I'm giving you the best world scenario. If you have a situation in which 80%, 90% of revenues in the budget are dependent on oil, what I want to do is to slowly converge to a situation in which the budget depends less on oil. And so slowly I begin to de-link expenditure in the budget from oil prices. So what I do is I use the average of oil prices in the last, 60 years, and I use that price. So if you look, actually, probably this is what the government of Russia is doing. If you look at the average of oil prices in the last 50, 55 years, it's between 45 and 50. So I would use that, something that is very, very, very long term. And just completely forget about whether oil price next period is going to be 60 or is going to be 30.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, guys, it's 5:37. I am very happy of this. I really did not expect too many questions. So if any one of you wants to go, they can freely go. I mean, this is already over for 7 minutes. But if there are more questions, very happy to answer. Please.
My name is Stepan, and I'm more so about management.
Management.
Yes. And the question is the following.
Yeah.
You showed that different countries have different strategies of spending oil money.
Yeah.
And Norway is some kind of outstanding. But
I would say so, yeah.
Of course, we know that Norway is not only different of these other countries by their way of spending money. It is also different in some other ways, and they also have different politics and politics institutions.
Absolutely.
And what I would like to ask you is your opinion of whether the politics institutions depend on economy institutions, or vice versa, where the economics depends on politics.
This is an excellent question. It's an excellent question. And I am not an historian, and I am not someone that knows too much about the evolution of institutions. I can say two things, basically.
Your opinion.
Okay, but my opinion is my opinion. It does not have a lot of value. So let me do two things anyway. One thing is this. One thing is Norway, okay? So Norway discovered oil at some point in the 70s at the same time that UK, the North Sea. So there is one problem that Norway does not have that Russia has. That is the geographical dimension of oil. Because in Norway, if you want to see where the oil is, it's in the middle of the sea. So, I mean, they go there, they extract the oil, they sell it, this never touches. So basically you have land. There is no region in Norway with oil, it's oil in the sea. It's different in Russia. Tatarstan has oil and others. So you have here, there's in here, it's in the continental part, so you have an issue related with how you spend oil. In Norway, it's totally an enclave, not in Russia. But this is just a footnote. The first point that I wanted to make is related to institutions. And you say, well, Norway is different from other countries. They have a different history, and all this is good. But what I invite you to do is this. Look at the macro situation of Norway during the late 70s, the 80s, and the beginning of the 90s. I did not bring it because, again, that was this perfect recipe for all of you to fall asleep, but I can show it to you. What you have is in Norway had exactly the same problems that all countries that were spending a lot of the oil wealth that they were extracting. So they had a lot of variability in inflation. Inflation was actually quite high. The price of eating in Oslo was the highest in the world. Buying property in Oslo, I mean, there was a bubble in property in Oslo. I mean, buying property in Oslo was much more expensive than buying in New York in the Fifth Avenue. Like enormous bubbles because they were spending a lot of the money that they were extracting from oil. They learned. There are people there. You have people here, there are people there. They are not Martians. They learned. They saw we are spending a lot. We are creating a lot of problems for our economy, and so we need to stop this, and we need to generate a way to stop this. Again, this did not happen 200 years ago. It did not happen 150 years ago. It happened barely 25 years ago. The fiscal rule was passed in Norway in 2001, 14 years ago. In the same time, I invite you again, all these numbers are available in the web. I mean, these are just public information. See how much Saudi Arabia exported, see how much Russia exported, see how much Venezuela exported, see how much Norway exported. Norway exported a fraction, minimal fraction of what the other countries exported. Then look at how much assets Norway had in comparison to all other countries, and you're going to see that Norway has much more assets. And so, again, there are people, and they solved the problem that they have. They discovered oil. They applied solution number 2 for a long time, almost 15 years. They saw the problems that they created. Norway in the 80s was not significantly different in terms of institutions as it is now. They made a mistake. They realized the mistake. They solved it. Let's go closer to home. Let's go to Russia. If you look at what the highest authorities were saying in Russia in 2002, 2003, 2004. Let me go back to this because actually it's quite interesting. And again, public information, go to and see what highest authorities were saying, presidential addresses, etc. Let's see here. So look at this. So I am standing in 2002, in 2003, in 2004, and I am doing the budget. And what I see is this. I'm not showing here the 1990s. 1990s, oil price was $10, $15, very cheap. So $20 was very high in comparison with the 90s. They were looking back and they say, oh my God, it's 100% more. And then in 2003, it was 30, and in 2004, it was 40, and they saying, okay, of course, we have all the experience in the 80s and the 90s that oil prices were $5, $10, they're going to go back. And so they created institutions. Russia created good institutions. Created a fiscal rule. They saved money. We have a reserve fund. I mean, Russia has a reserve fund, has a national well-being fund, and this money actually helped the country withstand this decrease in oil prices. The point is, was it enough? And what I'm saying is, it was good. It was a very good step. It improved a lot. It gave Russia a lot of flexibility, but it's not perfect. You need to go more. And the answer I would give without looking too much into history or institutions is Norway did it. They did it wrong first, then they did it right. There is no reason why Russia cannot do it right. Now, in terms of whether economic institutions or political institutions actually create one another, instead of answering the question, I'm going to give you a reference of a professor that knows about this 10 million times more than I can do, and if I say the answer, what I'll be doing is just repeating his answer. Go and read this book. It's very interesting. Not economic, I mean, basically no algebra, nothing. It's just basically a history of development. It's called Why Nations Fail. It's a book by Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson.
It's quite popular.
It's an amazing book, amazing book. And there you have basically the history of Great Britain, for instance, and how institutions evolved, and how after institutions evolved, economic institutions evolved. So just read it and you're going to have your own idea.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Yes?
Why nations fail?
Yeah. Why nations fail, I can write it down.
It is also in Russian.
Yeah, of course.
It called «Почему одни страны богатые, а другие бедные», по-моему, так. So if you refer to this book, then you must probably stand on the position that politics is primal.
I think that they don't make that point so strongly, but there is, I think that there is just, it's one and the other, it's together. But of course, you need to have some rule of law to have an economic system that works. Yes? There was someone there. Yes?
Hello, my name is Abdul. I wanted to ask...
No, just that. You study what?
Economics.
Economics. And you are from?
Pakistan.
Nice. Tell me.
So I had this question written down. I wanted to ask this, the head of the Central Bank of Russia. So I couldn't ask, so I'm asking you since you're an economist.
You wanted to ask this who?
Oh, sorry?
You wanted to ask this question to who?
The chairman of Russian Central Bank.
Wow, okay.
So with inflation rate at 7.5%, don't you think that the discount rate should be more than what it is now at 10.5%, keeping in mind that ruble has seen a downfall against dollar in recent times?
Are you from the press?
No.
Is there anyone from the press here? Who? No, okay. Anyway, I mean, I don't know what the question had to do at all with what we presented, but I'm going to try just a bit. So basically, what happens? The central bank is implementing a new framework to do monetary policy, okay? So this new framework to implement monetary policy is called inflation targeting. And inflation targeting works provided the expectations of people are more or less aligned with your objective as central bank. So it's true that interest rates are 10.5. It's true that inflation has decreased, and actually the central bank decreased rates in the last meeting, and we'll see what they do next week. But central bank did not move interest rates for 1 year because what the central bank was doing was looking at expectations. Expectations matter for inflation, and inflation expectations were very high. When you implement a new system, it takes time for inflation expectations to actually converge to the target. And so the central bank was actually quite right, waiting until those inflation expectations began to decrease. Now those inflation expectations are beginning to decrease, and so there was a first signal to decrease rates. Let's see what happens in the future.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Thanks so much.